And hope you've had a great weekend. Weekend for us was good. We went to the Pingathon function at Erina Baptist, and yesterday church was great and sermon was good actually. A person giving the sermon was talking about when we make plans to make sure we include God in them, otherwise things could be disastrous. Anyway, enough of that, enough of me talking. Welcome back, Graeme. What a surprise. I thought it was going to be next week.
No, I'm here already. It's good to be back too. Thank you very much, Frank.
Okay, would you like, as always, you have got a special guest lined up. Would you like to introduce our guest for today, please?
I would love to introduce Ian French, a very dear friend and a volunteer of Kairos Prison Ministry Australia. And he's going to tell us about kairos.org.au. Welcome, Ian.
Thanks very much, Graeme, and thanks for having me on the show. And good morning to all our listeners at Rhema Central Coast.
Yeah. So, Ian, our listener is going to be really keen to know what Kairos is about. I've just been in Cairo. I know it's not spelt like that.
Thanks, Graeme. Very much, Kairos is all about the 40,000 inmates that are, some would say, languishing in our prison system throughout Australia. There's 70 institutions in Australia that 40,000 men, women and youth are incarcerated. And Kairos is all about going into those prisons and basically serving these people who have been forgotten by the rest of society. And we do that by modelling the servanthood that Jesus provided to us, and by going in and serving these people who have basically been forgotten by society, and then through that starting to spread the gospel and the good news of Jesus Christ.
That's wonderful. And I understand, well, I know because I heard a little bit of involvement, that there are 3 programs. There's Kairos Inside, there's Kairos Torch, and there's Kairos Outside programs. Our listener would love to know what those 3 programs do and how they're differentiated. Ian?
So let me walk through those. So Kairos has been operating in Australia for about 20 odd years, and it started with what we call the Kairos Inside program. So this is quite a structured program that we take into the prisons themselves. Those who come along to it, we work closely with the chaplains in the prisons themselves, and all the people who attend the programs are volunteers, curious as to what the program is all about. And aware that it is a Christian-based program, but know very little about it. So we're invited in by the chaplains. We conduct that program over what we call a short course, which is an intensive 3-day program with the what we call guests, the inmates, and those guests are usually in up to groups of 24. So we have a large volunteer base required to support going into the Kairos Inside program. The Kairos Outside program is the counterpoint to that. So unfortunately, the representation of men in prison well outranks the number of women in prison, something around the 80% to 20%. So the families of those who are incarcerated, we believe there's an opportunity to support them while their husbands or their brothers or their uncles or cousins are in prison. We undertake a Kairos Outside program, and this is one run essentially by the women folk of Kairos, and it is a complementary program to support the families for those of the inmates who are actually going through the similar program internally. So they run in hand in glove. And we also have, as you touched on, Graeme, and I know that you're involved with Kairos Torch. Now, Kairos Torch is a shorter program aimed at youth, and we go into youth detention centres and provide quite a cut down and hopefully engaging service piece for the youth who are in the detention centres as well. And Graeme, you've got some stories there about dealing with the youth and how challenging that can be. But across those 3 programs, as I mentioned, we are in 20 institutions, and we're currently running 35 programs nationwide at the moment. I did outline there's plenty needed to sustain those current programs, and plenty of opportunities for us to work in other institutions throughout Australia. So that's what I'm here to talk a little bit about today.
Terrific. And our listeners should know that you're looking for volunteers. It's a Christian organisation, Christian volunteers who can share their faith.
Of course. So the three things that all Christian charities need: first and foremost, prayer. We at the I'm part of the leadership team of Kairos, heavily focused in the spirituality that underpins the ministry that's being laid out before us by Christ himself. It's not our ministry, he's laid it out in front of us. And prayer is extremely powerful as a support for the opening of hearts in the institutions themselves, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. For encouraging those who come to the program. Can be quite stressful for inmates to contemplate coming to such a program, and of course prayer for those that are actually undertaking and providing the program themselves. I direct your listeners to our website in that sense, Graeme. We kairos.org.au. They would find there what we have as called our prayer vigils. So for every program that we run, for example, we're currently running a program in the John Moroney Correctional Institute at Windsor in Sydney, kicked off this morning. We have essentially a prayer vigil calendar where we ask those with the Christian heart to sign up and pray for us intently for a half hour over the life of that course, and for the inmates, for those undertaking it. So you can find that at kairos.org.au. The lifeblood of the ministry, though, is volunteers. Currently, we have some 3,000 volunteers giving of their time, particularly to undertake and deliver the programs. But we always encourage more volunteers. There's those who have a heart for a very practical ministry might be highly attracted to Kairos. All we seek from you is a giving heart and an open mind to deliver the message of Christ into these environments, and then we'll do the rest with you. As always, the cost of delivering the programs is expensive. It costs approximately $5,000 to $6,000 to deliver one program into one prison, and that usually comes from our volunteer base. I've been brought into Kairos. I joined Kairos a couple of years ago to help do something a little bit at the corporate level, but we very much rely on our volunteers delivering the programs to help on that financial support as well. So they're the three big plays in support of the ministry, Graeme.
Terrific. So they also serve who simply stay and pray.
Very much.
And it's interesting that you're kicking off a program just today.
Correct.
So those of the audience who are intercessors should know that they can start praying for that one in Windsor.
Windsor
right
away.
Sydney.
Yeah. And most importantly, Kairos Prison Ministry is an international program started in America some 50 years ago. It's been running in Australia for around about 20 years now. And we have great counter support from our brothers, American brothers and sisters, also brothers and sisters in Africa. We have small representation in New Zealand, and they're running programs all the time. So the way we can actually internationally prayer support those programs of, at the moment, if we were praying for programs that were occurring in the US as an example, it's the middle of the night there, but as we know with a vigil, we like to pray all the way through for all of the participants and the organisers. So quite often a lot of our Australian intercessors are supporting the programs that are running in America at the moment, and likewise our brothers and sisters in that part of the world support us when we're delivering here as well.
Very exciting, and a great opportunity to do just as Jesus said, visit those who are in prison. I was in prison and you visited me.
Yeah.
Challenging words. And so the audience and members of it who are able got time, and it's usually in the evening for at least for Kairos Torch, isn't it? And we've got one right here on the Central Coast.
You do, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
The Frank Baxter Juvenile Justice Centre.
Yeah, so for a number of years we've been in the Frank Baxter Juvenile Centre up here at Carryong, and I know Graeme's involved in that. Youth are a particular challenge in the youth detention centres, as you might surprise. We look at in the detention centres, it's youth usually up to about 21 years of age, and then dependent on the nature of their crime, they may end up in the formal system. So the Kairos Torch program particularly targets youth between the ages of 14 and 21. And for any of our listeners out there who've had teenage children at that age, They know the attention span can be short, and keeping them engaged and interested can be difficult. So there's a particular challenge for our volunteers in delivering that program to engage with the youth, and what we like to say, sow the seed of what a walking in the steps of what we believe is our Saviour can be. Perhaps bring these young men, and it is ostensibly men, back on a righteous path once they've done whatever their time that they've needed to in the youth detention centre.
Exactly, and of course statistically, most people who come to the Lord come before they reach the age of 20, isn't that right?
Yes, I've heard that. It's something like that, isn't it? Yeah.
It's a great for your listeners who are very practically oriented. It's what brought me to the ministry. I'm a practical Christian. I'm in my, for those we're on radio, so it's hard to see me. I'm in my 50s, and I was looking for a way to give back. And it is quite time intensive, the Kairos ministry, so one needs to find the time, but I found the Lord creates the space to undertake the ministry, but it's extremely practical. And the fact that we are in so many prisons is a testament to the fact that the prison authorities, who we are the guests of in this ministry, have seen a practical outcome from delivering the Kairos programs inside. So regardless of where the faith base is of the governors of the actual prisons, or in some cases the general managers as they are known these days, or in fact the ministers of government, and that it's a state government we look to, they've seen the practical benefit of the inmates who undertake the Kairos program, that apart from the calming influence that the program has had on the participants, they note that during the course of the programs and for a period thereafter, there is a general calm in the overall prison community. And we know why that is. We know the Lord has moved into that space, through the program we're doing. But not surprisingly, those who are of a non-faith background see the practical benefits of it. So we are blessed that the Lord has gone ahead of us in a number of states with the correctional service ministries in those states, and of course then into the actual institutions themselves, and paved the way for us to deliver these programs.
Right. Well, when we come back, I'd love to talk about volunteers, and especially the replacement of dear brothers in Christ, who one of them only last week was promoted to glory, who has always been such a big supporter. We'll talk about him, and also dear Alex, who introduced me to the program, who's now moving to Queensland. So.
Oh, that Alex.
That
yes,
Alex.
We know Alex, don't we? Great welcome back to Graeme. I thought he was going to be back next week, but he's back from his tour with Dr. Michael Youssef, and we've got our special guest Ian French from Kairos. Once again, welcome to the Central Coast, Ian, and to Rhema.
Thank you very much.
It's good to be welcome back. And we were discussing before the break the need for volunteers, and some in the audience will have known Bram Hester, who has been with us for 20 years, playing the music faithfully, and a great supporter for the Kairos Torch program up at the Frank Baxter Juvenile Justice Centre. He was promoted to glory last week, and of course Alex Leishman, who introduced me to Kairos, is moving to Queensland. So there's always this need to replace volunteers, isn't there? So tell us what a volunteer should be ready to be trained to do, and what the training is. And I'm sure our audience would love to hear that.
Yeah, happy to do that, Graeme. It's certainly a very challenging program, but as I mentioned in our first session, there's that it's all about having a mature Christian heart. That in place, we have extensive training that assists people who want to get involved in the program, delivering the programs in any range of ways. So we talked about prayer, involvement in prayer. We provide the intention and the focus to enable people to do the praying. If you're wanting to be involved in the program, whether it's inside the prison or in supporting the outside women's group, or in fact in the detention centres, there's quite a lot of extensive training undertaken by Kairos itself to help you in that area. The teams are large. I'll give you an example. I myself am stepping into my first team to deliver a program in the Parklea Correctional Centre Parklea is a suburb of Sydney, and I'm doing my very first program commencing next Monday, November the 11th. The program is conducted over 3 full days inside the prison. We have 24 guests coming to that event, and we have 30 fully trained volunteers undertaking that program. That's how intense the program is. This past Saturday, I finished my 4th day of full training to prepare myself for the completion of the program. As I said, I'm a brand newbie, but I'm surrounded by loving Christian men and women who, once they have volunteered, some of the volunteers have done, this has been their 20th program. Wow. They've been doing that, and some of them have been doing it for 20 years since the outset. So full day training over 4 days just to prepare yourself to go in and deliver the actual program. And the involvement is widespread. You may say, oh, what sort of skills do I need to do this? I can't emphasise more to you, Graeme. It's the mature Christian heart that is at the core of what we want to do, and everything else in terms of role that you might play in a program is laid out. I touched on the program is actually a serving program. It's been the anecdotal anecdote given to me about when the inmates come for the first time in the very first opening morning. They are naturally suspicious about what this is all about. They're wondering oh God, there's a bunch of Christians coming in. What are they after? Who's paying for them to be here? And very quickly over the day 1.5, we allay those fears, and it's all about serving these people who, in most cases, have never been served before. Quite often they're coming from broken homes, poor relationships where there's been no love.
Yeah.
And the first and foremost, while the Lord saved us, he saved us through his love, and he's asking us to go out and provide that love to others. So you'll be trained as part of the training in how we actually love these inmates for those 3 days that we're in with them. By serving them, we feed them up healthily. They love the food. The feedback is, we love Kairos because the food's great. And hopefully none of our listeners have had to spend time in prison, but if you had, you know that the food is pretty basic and pretty regiment. And we have loving hearts by our female and male volunteers who cook, literally cook, and bring the food in. We're allowed to do that and feed these young men, women and youth on good, nourishing food. We then talk to them about what they're coming from their life experience, and listen. And that's highly important, and a good ability to open your heart to listen to their stories is highly important. But it's a good, well-structured program, and there are lessons to be learnt throughout the 3 days. The volunteers usually present talks around particular themes of both Christian themes and life themes, and that helps us plug into these men and women and youth to bring them out of their shells and think about the Lord at the end of the day, and what a walk in faith with him might look like if they've never been there before, or what may in fact be again if they re-engage. So you could work in a kitchen, you could be sitting on a table talking with these people, you could be doing runnings from the shops and the like, you could be doing a prayer vigil, a range of activities that are available through the program. Just have that charitable and Christian heart, mature heart is the key ingredient, Graeme.
Exactly, and the rewards are significant. There's an anointing, there's a feeling, and there's a buzz after going to one of those programs.
Yeah.
As you leave, you know that you've just been right in the centre of God's will. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
And I love the motto, which is listen, listen, love, love. And it's wonderful that your focus is on pray first of all, pray secondly, and pray thirdly.
Correct, without a doubt.
Just as Billy Graham advised us, must be the approach and the focus.
Yeah.
So that's really exciting. And I know that at the Kairos Torch program at the Frank Baxter Juvenile Justice Centre, the talker will end with a question related to his talk, and then the question will be discussed around the table.
Correct, yeah.
And then, of course, it's important to listen. And the boys, they talk. They do talk. And, of course, women are allowed to come in there, so some of them become mother figures and others become father figures to boys that are probably missing and lacking such influences in their lives.
Yeah. Similarly with the outside program, so I touched at the outside at the top of the hour, the Kairos Outside Women's Program, and I mentioned that this is essentially the support mechanism for those that are inside the prison and going through the inside program. And the intent is there that should inmates take on the journey and walk further with Christ, after they come out of prison, sometimes if they were only returning immediately to their old environments, to their old friendship relations, very quickly they can be again redirected into a life of crime. And this is one of the more practical things that we've learned, is that there is a 50% reoffending rate for those who have done time for a particular crime, move back into the world, and 50% of them actually end up back in prison, because the world is a crazy place. It's interesting when you get an insight of somewhere. If you're inside a prison, it's very regimented. You know, you're told what to do. You eat at the same time. You study at the same time. You exercise at the same time. Very regimented. Quite often, once someone has done the time for whatever crime they have, they're put into with $400 in their hand and go for it. You know, and not unsurprisingly, they return to their old ways because that's all they know in some instances. So the Kairos Outside Women program is very strong at developing a culture and an environment that they can move into. So we're taking their women folk, maybe their sisters, their mothers, on a volunteer basis on the same journey that's happening for the individuals inside. Beautiful and very powerful duality there in terms of the Lord walking ahead of those in prison and walking beside those that will look to open their arms and embrace them in a new way when they come out. Yeah, so great experience.
Right, and volunteers almost become part-time, admittedly, surrogate parents. I remember the question that was asked at the end of one talk was, so what did your father do that was most influential in your life? And one young man answered, and it rather shocked me, my father taught me how to live on the streets. So that's what we can step in and teach, a different way of living, which is such a privilege, such an opportunity. So hopefully the audience will be some of the audience will be thinking about how they can contribute.
And Graeme, we were talking just during the break about there's a little bit of, and I wasn't going to use this term on air, but I am going to use a little bit of guilty pleasure. It's said consistently that those who actually volunteer for the Kairos Prison Ministry get as much out of it as they are putting into it. And sometimes we can resile on that and say, well, that's not about what we're giving, but it's interesting that the Lord reinforces your walk through the same process of bringing others potentially to Christ as well. And consistently, as I mentioned earlier, that there are some of our volunteers have been doing this since day one. Our very first program was held in the maximum security prison at Long Bay in Sydney. We're not in Long Bay at the moment because that's changed over time, but there are individuals supporting that program, and that was back in the early 80s, 1980s and mid-1980s, who are still involved with Kairos now, still delivering programs and encouraging the younger ones to come on and get involved. But even more importantly than that is that those who were part of the program, who benefited from the program, be they as inmates or as in fact the families of inmates, are in fact in the program themselves now and delivering it back for inmates that they know and for the people. And that's a great testimony for the Lord going ahead of us. People understanding the grace, saving grace offered, and then taking those first steps that is encouraged by the program. So I encourage all the listeners to contemplate in any way, shape or form what little bit of volunteering they can do. And that first step, I'll regret it though, that you may be committing more than just one step.
And just whether it's to pray, to volunteer, or to pay a donation to keep the program going. There's 40,000 inmates that can be reached, and they're a captive population.
They are.
No pun intended.
Yeah, so we are, as I think I touched, there are 40,000 inmates approximately in the various centres throughout Australia. There are 70 institutions throughout Australia. We're currently in 20 of those institutions at the moment. Some we'll probably never get into. Most of the programs are delivered into medium and minimum security prisons. So some volunteers concern themselves with, is there a threat to us in terms of the environments we go into? I can only stress that we are in fact the guests of the prison administration, and apart from the training around the Kairos program, there's also quite a deal of training that needs to be completed to have ourselves cleared to actually enter into a prison environment, and there are rules and regulations there as well. So once you're informed about that, any concerns that you may have about actually being inside a prison conducting a program quickly falls away in that sense. We clearly need to sustain the 20 institutions we're in. So we're in 20 institutions and we have 35 programs running against those. So we need to consistently sustain those. I mentioned that I'm at the Parkley program, and this is number 10 of Parkley, so 10 times this program's been run over the last 5 years. They usually run the program twice a year. It's quite, takes a lot of time, a lot of energy, and we look to refresh our volunteers, so you can see that the need for new volunteers all the time is important to us. Time consuming, yes. But as Graeme touched on, the programs cost money to run, so all donations through the Kairos website, kairos.org.au. Anything over $2 is tax deductible. We're a registered charity in that sense, so every cent you can give in support of the broader charity would be greatly appreciated.
And I've been to a closing ceremony. I haven't actually done a program, an inside program, but I have been to a closing ceremony in a prison in Adelaide, in South Australia, and I was very impressed. So after the break, we should talk about just what happens in that program, which is different from the fortnightly program we do with Kairos Talk.
Happy to do so.
Okay, thank you, Graeme. Thank you, Ian. And if you want to go to the website, Kairos is spelled KAIROS.org.au, and I'll give this trip with our special guest, Ian French from Kairos. Welcome again, Ian, to Central Coast.
Thank you, Frank.
And Ian's been telling us that there's the opportunity, if nothing more than to pray, and I shouldn't use the word nothing, because prayer is the most important. The prayer vigil that's on, and we're looking for, or Kairos is looking for those volunteers who will take a half-hour slot and be praying about the programs that are going. There's one beginning just today, this very day, and as Billy Graham used to say, there's 3 things you must do. You must pray, number 1, you must pray, number 2, and you must pray, number 3.
I think that's good advice.
It's really good, and so needs to be emphasised, and we all need to be reminded of that.
Graeme, you mentioned, yeah, you're right. We've got a program kicking off at John Moroney, which is in Windsor in Sydney. And importantly, that's our very first program. We were invited into John Moroney just in the last 6 months by New South Wales Corrective Services. So we've actually got a very strong and experienced group of volunteers going into that to make the best impression possible in that. But yes, so if you go to the Kairos website, kairos.org.au, you'll see there a prayer calendar, prayer vigil. Sign up for that half an hour to support both the inmates who are attending that program and the volunteers. That'd be great. After the program, Frank's going to provide some phone numbers and contact details for the Kairos support office, give you another option to get in contact with the organisation. Offline, I know we were talking about the closing ceremony, Graeme. You wanted me to talk to everybody about the closing ceremony.
Yes, because I was privileged to attend one in South Australia where around 20 inmates had finished the program, stood up and spoke. It was very impressive. They'd invited their families. There was standing room only inside the jail. And tell us how what that culmination was, what those men had been through for, I think, 3 days. Yeah.
So the great beauty of the closing ceremony is the fact that whilst the guys and gals who are on the program know there is going to be essentially like a graduation at the end, they don't know what we do in terms of constructing it to be a great outcoming and outturning from that program. So Graeme mentioned there are a range of visitors and a range of family members who come along to share in the joyous completion of this program with these individuals. And I, like Graeme, I was invited as a guest to what we call a closing ceremony at Parklea. And just after the boys had been involved in a 3-day intensive program where they found out about themselves, found that if no one else in this world loves them, God loves them, and that they do something with that, then not unsurprisingly they are transformed, even if only for a short period through those 3 days, and then outpouring of love and joy when they come into the closing ceremony and they see these people who have either been supporting them through the program, guests and friends there to greet them and welcome them. It's just a great outpouring of love and a completion of that. So everybody gets on a high for that. So a great experience. So if you're a bit wondering about, well, how do I get involved in Kairos? Yes, you can pick up the phone and speak to the office. They'll direct you to the right program or individuals who are conducting those in your area. But maybe just going along to a closing ceremony, or as I said, for the outside women, they meet regularly in school halls, scout halls, and the like. It's all organised. Go along and see the gift of joy, the gift of life that the Lord brings, and has touched for at least for a little period, for these men and women and their families over a period of time. Yeah, most encouraging.
And you mentioned that somebody in our audience, some people in our audience may know the wife of somebody who's incarcerated, or even the husband of someone who's incarcerated.
Yeah.
And tell us about Kairos Outside Women and also Kairos Outside Men, which is on the drawing board, right?
Yeah. So let me touch a little on those. So, want to encourage the listeners that they may know somebody who's in prison. They may know family members or friends who are dealing with having family members in prison. Encourage them to think about what Kairos does, because yes, whilst it's a Christian based program, the learnings that these young men and women and even older men and women who are in prison get from the content of the program is life transforming in one way or the other. Graeme, you mentioned the Kairos Outside Men. It's actually been going for nearly 10 years, Kairos Outside Men, and it doesn't have an equivalent in America. It was something completely devised by those who'd been involved in Kairos Inside Ministry, a bunch of men who saw that it was a bit of a missing link between completion of the Kairos program in prison and then what happens after the event. So it's important to understand the intent of the program is essentially to create a church, the body of individuals who form up the church in support of our Lord Jesus within a Christian environment under the guidance of a chaplain. So while they're in the prison system, they continue to meet post the program with the chaplain and of course with Kairos support individuals who go in regularly. But thereafter there seemed to be a gap. What happened when those who were in prison migrated out? So a number of gentlemen some 10 years ago decided, let's see if we can create a Kairos Outside Men program. As I mentioned, our Kairos Outside Women program extremely strong in its support for members of men who are incarcerated. What the Kairos Outside Men program did was sort of took the best bits of Kairos Outside Women, some of the Kairos Inside program, and created a combination, and have been running those successfully. Still probably what I would call in trial period to get it quite right. And they've been running those in one site in Sydney now for that 10 years. So it's an area that we think there's an opportunity to grow faithfully, and if the Lord looks to take us that way. Because the issue is that there is groups that support what we would call post-release ministry. So groups such as Prison Fellowship, Crossroads, are also heavily involved in delivering in prison programs, and are also involved in connecting prisoners or inmates with communities external to those for when they finish their time. We've understood as our own Christian ministry that we need to do a little bit more with these other charities who are providing similar pathways to understand a Christian journey. And we've just started most recently doing work with Prison Fellowship and with Crossroads. Your listeners might be familiar with those areas. But in combination, we believe that to ensure that those that come through the program, supported in their families through the KO Women's, and have an opportunity to re-engage through KO Men.
That's terrific to hear that there's collaboration between the ministries, and that there's this link back to the community, follow-up. Just clarify for me and the audience, Kairos that works in men's prisons for mature men is staffed and volunteered by men. Is that correct? And those who work with women in women's prisons by women. Is that correct? Did you just amplify that for me?
Yeah, not exclusively so, but predominantly for delivery of the men's program into the men's prisons. The majority of the program volunteers are men. But we have an outside team. It sounds a little crazy, but we have an outside team who do a lot of the food preparation, a lot of the serving, and they are in fact women. A combination of women and men who come and serve in that capacity. But the way the program is delivered, we create small families. So as I mentioned, I'm actually going to Parklea next week for my first program. There are 24 inmates coming to that program. We've formed them up into family tables of 6 inmates and 3 volunteers. And we stay together through the whole course of the program. And we're not interrupted in the process of feeding and refreshing ourselves as we're conducting the program. That service from the heart of great food, great refreshment comes from our outside teams, and quite a number of those are the ladies who do that. Quite a lot of the ladies and men prepare a lot of the food that we bring in as well. Yes, we are also directly in some women's prisons, and the reverse is the case. So the women should deliver the majority of the program, and then some of the men folk actually support in those supporter roles. So it does work in that combination, Graeme.
Great investment. And I always think Jesus said, if you gain the whole world and lose your soul, you have no profit, which equates one soul with the value of the whole world. So if the whole Kairos program won one soul to the Lord, it'd be worth it. Yeah. But you're winning hundreds, and it's impacting the prison system and society at large. So congratulations. It's a great ministry.
So in closing, we just sort of say to Graeme and to the listeners that Kairos is a front row seat to God's miracles inside prisons. And